So what I need to do to be able to control sound is I need to import that sound to my library. Sound is a property of a frame, or it can be controlled by code, but sound is not something that we necessarily, it's not artwork. We don't put it on the stage or anything like that. So I'm going to go grab this 15-second sound file that I downloaded. If I look at it over here, here's the file. Now, there's this column called AS Linkage. This is Actionscript Linkage, that if we provide data in that column, we're able to then control this sound with code. So to do that, I can right-click on the sound and say Properties. And then under Properties, I can see where it says Actionscript. And what I need to do is say Export for Actionscript, and then I'm going to have to provide it with a class name. I could be lazy and just double-click in the AS Linkage column over here and start typing it in. But some installs of Flash, you may not see that. You may see something else instead of that, or it'll look like this, and you're like, well, there's no linkage column. What do I do? How do I find it? So the way to make that work is you go to Properties, go to Actionscript, Export for Actionscript. This tells Flash the sound may not appear directly in my timeline, but I want it to play through code. So to do that, I export it, and I need to give it a class name. Classes should really only have letters, numbers, and underscore in their names, and preferably they can't start with a number. They do have to start with the letter, and tradition holds that they start with the capital letter. So I'll just call this Bluegrass. And now Flash is going to give me a message and says the definition for it could not be found. Someone will out to bing, blah, 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 blah. I'll say, don't show me again. We're good. And that's it. So if I look over here, I will notice that it now does say in the AS Linkage, it says Bluegrass. So I could have just double-clicked in that column and typed in there, and that would have been the same as clicking the box and going through there. In the beginning, it's probably best to use the properties and do that so you get familiar with where it is. I find that these days I'm lazy and I'll usually just type in the column there and be done with it. And that works for me. But you can do whatever works for you. So now that I've done that, I can now write code to make this sound play. And that's what we're going to look at first, is the very basic, easiest way to tell the sound to play, because you may find as you work on your project that you'll have certain sound effects. You'll have footsteps or a gun go off or a car horn make noise or something, and you play your movie back and it's just, no matter what keyframe you put it on, it's not playing at the right time. And the longer your project gets, the more likely you will find your sounds will grow out of sync. So the way to combat that is, at the frame you want the sound to play, you just insert a little bit of code that says, hey, I want this sound to play. So this first method just plays the sound. It gives us no control over it. It's like turning it loose in the wild. We tell it to play, and then it's like, that's it. It's playing, and it will play out in its entirety, and we can't do anything about it. So I can click in this frame, click under Actions, and now I can start typing in my actions. That's under Window, Actions, which is Option F9 on the Mac, F9 if you're on Windows, or it's in your tools, it's the one with the little arrow on it. So I hit Actions. Now, if I want to be able to have the sound play, I have to create an instance of it. It's the same way when I make a symbol in my library. If I don't put it on the stage, we'll never see it. It doesn't matter how many cool pieces of artwork I have in my library. If you don't put them on the stage, there's no instances of them. So I have to make an instance of this. So I can call it var, and I'll just call it music. Now, Flash, at its current version, requires you to type your variables. That is, you have to tell Flash what kind of variable it's going to be. The word on the street is the next iteration of Actionscript that is in development that will be coming out probably with CS6. They're going to go to variable type inference, so they're going to not require you to explicitly type your variables. It will try to kind of guess what it is, which is kind of funny because that's how it used to be when things were a little bit simpler. Then they went to more strict typing, and now they're looking to go away from it. So, well, the type of thing it is. It's not a movie clip, it's not a sprite, it's not a shape, it's sound. So if I just start typing, and by the time I get to SOU, I can see that sound is there. And I hit return. Now I put an import statement in. When your code is in your document, it's not in a separate Actionscript file that you're importing into your project, you don't need a lot of import statements. You can often survive without. But if Flash gives you one, just leave it. Don't delete it. Go, oh, I didn't type that out. No, just leave it. Generally, it does make Flash happier if you just leave them. And it's all about making it happy. So, variable, music, type, sound. Now, I've made it variable. I've said it's a sound, but I haven't said what it really is. I haven't populated it with something. So I'm going to populate it from my library. I'll say it's a new, and now it's a bluegrass. And then convention holds, I put set of parentheses and a semicolon after it. So var music's type sound equals new bluegrass. So that's how you would read it. Even though it's var music colon sound with a capital S equals new bluegrass parenthesis close parenthesis semicolon. So I just made an instance of this sound. And on my next line, I could say music.play. And now the code hinting, it knows it's a sound object. So it knows what kind of things to try and it can do. It knows it can play, it can load, so it can do all kinds of things. So in this case, I'm going to say play, and I just hit return to choose what it was highlighting, like this. So music.play. So variables, think of variables as nouns. They're objects. When you put a dot after it, and then the word after it has parentheses, that's kind of a verb. So music.play, we're telling it to do an action. The technical term is called a method. That's in programming speak, they refer to that as a method. So play is a method that sound objects have available to them. So I'm saying music.play. So if I save this and now run this, music started playing. Now, if my movie were, say, 48 frames long, stretched out, 49 I missed, what is going to happen at this point is we're going to have to wait about 2 seconds before the sound starts playing. 1, 2. Now you may notice that something strange started happening. Okay, so I've brought a second file in. I've set up its linkage and it's ready to go. So now I'm going to add some other information. Now currently we just have that sound firing off, but it's not really under our control. What I can do, so we're going to change this from music. I'll call this grass and plate. So now I have grass and plate. Now if I were to run this, I would get an error message. And this is something when you run a Flash movie, if you find that your movie starts playing, but you have code that should do otherwise, and everything just starts going and going and going, and you're like, no, that's not right. When you have an error message, it ignores any code that was in your movie, and it just keeps playing. And when you get error messages, they used to be super cryptic, and you just get a type error message. It wouldn't tell you what it was or why. You just got error message, like here we get 1102, so we get error message type 1102 or 1120, and you'd be like, okay. That helped a lot. So you'd go hop on to Google, type in the error code, and then read through and try to make sense. And you're like, okay, but where's it happening? And when you get 1,000 lines of code, without a line number, it really stinks. But here I can just double click on the error message and it goes and highlights the line that's offending it. And the offending line is because I'm referencing something called music, but I don't have any, music doesn't exist now because I changed my variable name. So we have to be really careful with how we name things and what we reference. And if you evolve things over time, you will notice that you will run into problems as well. So I'm just going to get rid of that because I don't need that. And now I'm going to create something called a sound channel. And I'm going to just abbreviate it as SC. And it's going to be a new sound channel. Now the code completion in Flash is fairly decent now. It used to just be absolutely horrible, but it's pretty good now. So, okay, so I have this variable sound channel. It's a new sound channel. Now, what's nice about this is I can make this behave similar to what we had before. I can say sound channel is equal to play. So let's run this. So there's no actual real difference that's going on here yet, except that the sound is playing. So the real advantage here is that sound objects, we can tell them to play, but that's like turning it loose in the wild with no restrictions, controls, obedience collars, or anything. Sound channels, on the other hand, are able to then listen for when they're done playing. Sound channels are able to tell other things to happen. They can do all kinds of magical, wonderful things. When we have a sound channel, we can even do a sound transform on it to actually change the volume or the panning of the sound as well. So it makes it a pretty powerful thing, where if we just tell our sound instance to play or pause or play or stop, we're kind of limited. So it's nice to use a sound channel type of object. Once you tell a sound channel to play, well, then we can actually even tell the sound channel to listen for when it's done. What I'm going to do is add a few lines of code space in here. Then at the very end of this, I'm just going to put in a stop. So I'm actually going to tell my movie here to stop at frame number 49. For that matter, I could even go back to frame 1 and get rid of everything, or I could put it doesn't even really matter what frame number I am anymore. But I can now, through the magic of code, I can say sound channel dot add event listener, and now I can say I want to listen for an event. But the code completion right now isn't giving me a lot of help for my sound channel event listeners because it hasn't imported what it needs or doesn't know. So what I can do with this is an event listener listens for an event, and when that event occurs, it calls a function. We've used the mouse event.click in times past, and when it heard the click, it called whatever function we assigned to it. So I'm going to say function sound done. And it's sound done, then parenthesis e:\event. E is going to just be a short reference to the sound event object. And then I can say event, because this is an event we're listening for, and then the type of event, it doesn't return anything, so that's void, and a couple curly Q braces to round things out. Now that we've done that, it still is being difficult in its code completion. Sound underscore complete. Now, why the code completion failed right now, I'm not entirely certain, but it did. But we can also, when you're working on code and trying to get things to turn out and you're not sure, okay, what I want to make sure it's working now before I add more complexity into it. That's a very common experience when you're coding. You build a little piece, make sure it works before you go in, because you don't want to build something that's like 20 steps deep, unsure if even step 1 works, and then go, okay, it's not working. Where's the problem? So it's good to kind of build in checks along the way. And in Flash, we do that using the trace command. So currently, I'm just going to send myself a message where it will output to the output window a message sound over. Now, if you work in, say, JavaScript, you might use console.log, and then you put a message to yourself that way. So it's a common technique that we can use for sending ourselves messages. So currently, the sound is going to play because we're telling the sound channel to play. Then we tell the sound channel to listen for being done. And then when it's done, we just have it send out a message. But the whole time, it's not going to start looping over itself because we've told the movie to now stop. So I can play this. Now I wish I downloaded a 3-second clip so it would end fast instead of like 15 seconds. And there's the message showing up in my output window down here. The sound is over. So now it did what I needed it to do. But instead of telling it to trace that out, and if I want to leave something but just temporarily disable it, I can comment it by using 2 slashes in front of it. But now I could say SC is now equal to plate dot play. Ooh, actually, I saw something that will make the demo go faster. Start time. I believe time is in milliseconds, so if this is 15,000 milliseconds long, we'll just put it at 10,000, so then that one will just play through, and I'll do that for here. Trying to speed up the process, so let's hope that I guessed right on that. Okay. So we played the final 5 seconds of each one. So now we've proved that we can now control the sound. We can listen for when a sound is done so that we can make all kinds of magic happen with the sound. So if I want sound to play in the background of my project, I can use the sound complete, and I can then keep listening for that sound. So if we wanted a single sound to loop based on when it's done, we could just create a series of listeners that it listens for when it's done, it tells itself to play again, and then tells it to again listen for when it's done. One key important point here is you must add the listener for sound complete after you have the sound playing. I've tried to organize my code so I put all my listeners in one place and my method calls somewhere else, and then I found out the hard way. It's like, why won't my sound complete work? It only works if you tell it to start listening after it's already playing. If it listens for the sound to be done before the sound ever plays, it doesn't work. If you haven't found it already, Window Common Libraries, you'll see there's buttons, classes, and most importantly, sounds. So I can choose sounds. I get a whole library of sounds at my disposal that come pre-built with Flash. Nice. They're not necessarily good sounds. A lot of them are these like ridiculous. That works. I'm doing that. So I'm going to go add that over to my project, and we'll call that Scream. All right. So there's all kinds of sounds, as you saw. Now, if I go into my timeline here, I want that sound to play at, say, frame 10. So I will click at frame 10, insert a keyframe. I will go into my actions for frame 10, var ouch type sound equals new scream. Now, when you are referencing variables and referencing the linkage names, it's case sensitive. So it's really, really important that you match the case. Otherwise, it will not work. So match the case. So then at this point, I can just say ouch.play like that. That'll just play the scream at frame, frame 10. And then the music will start. So if I test my movie, or not. Oh, and notice how I was able to double click on the error message and go to where I was doing that little demo line, left a little thing of code in there that I didn't need. So if you're going to leave code in your project, make sure it's working code. Otherwise, comment it out. It's really recommended as you're doing things, even to add in a line and go, creating my variables here, listening for the sound to finish. And I mean, so you can put comments in through your code, because a week later, a month later, 6 months later, a year, 2 years later, if you don't have those comments, you'll have to spend some time deciphering. The comments will help you at 3 in the morning when you're working and your brain is really foggy. The comments will help guide you. It's kind of like Rudolph's red nose on, leading Santa's sleigh through that foggy night. You're able to find your way in the dark. So now let's try and run it. It's kind of an appropriate beginning sound to lead into our bluegrass music, so I'm digging it.
It needs a breaking bottle.
All right, so with all the pieces in place, okay, I think we've got it. That's a wrap. So to make this clickable, I can highlight it, convert it to a symbol. I'm going to use a movie clip. I'm just going to call it my button. Now that I have that there, it needs to have an instance name. So I have to go up here and give it an instance name. Anytime we want control of something, it needs to have an instance name. Our sounds that we were working with, their instance names were their variable name. So in essence, here, I could call this variable name. That would kind of be the same thing. It's the variable name, the instance name of it. So I'll call it enter button. Notice I'm not using any spaces. The same rules for naming variables apply for instance names. Letters, numbers, underscore. You can use hyphen. I'm not a big fan of it. And always start with a letter. And typically, instance and variables always start with lowercase letters. Classes start with uppercase. So this is a lowercase enter button that I'm going to put onto my project. So now to make this clickable, it really should. So to get this on its own layer so it's clickable with the rest of it, or so my actions can be on their own, I'm just going to add a new layer, put the button on that layer. We don't need it after frame 1. So now I can go back to my actions. Even name this actions. And now I can add in the code to make this button work. So the code goes on the frame. It does not go on the object itself. So I need to tell my enter button to listen. Now, if you notice, the code completion is not doing a lot because there's no import statements on this frame, and I haven't put the function part in. So suddenly it's like, it's not really helping me. So if you want it to help you, what you can do is define your function. Call it click handler. And now this is a mouse event. And some things you'll just have to commit to memory, like events versus mouse events. And there's certain event type things, and you'll just have to memorize those or find snippets of code that you recycle from project to project. When I first learned how to do this, I would just go get project that worked in one code, bring that into the other project, and then manipulate the details until it did what I needed it to do. Eventually, after typing things in enough times, it just got burned into my brain, and I didn't have to think too hard about doing it. So now if I say enter button dot add event listener to mouse event dot, and theoretically it should give me code completion, but apparently it still doesn't want to anymore. But I'll go for a click, and then I put a comma and then say click handler. And at this point, I can just simply say play. This tells the main timeline to play. What I also need to do on this frame is say stop, so the movie does not advance until I click this button. So I've now put a pause or a stop at the beginning of my movie. So if I run this, it's always a good idea when you start doing code for your project, save frequently, and then every time before you test movies, save, so you don't run into like, oh my gosh, it blew up on me, and all is wrong. So we can see we're now stopped in frame 1. Now if you look, we don't get the hand over it. I'll show you how to get the hand over a movie clip so it looks more like a button. I'll say click to enter. Alright, so we proved it works. Going back into the code, we can go and say we are just going to tell it to treat it like a button, so we say set its button mode to true, and we can see now I get the hand when I'm over it. So if I use a movie clip, I can get that. Now before Flash, or even now after Flash using other tools, if you want rollover effects to occur, you actually have to not use mouse event click per se, but you'll probably use a mouse enter, a mouse leave, a mouse down, so you'll actually have to set listeners for each mouse state. You'll have to then set functions of what you need to occur for each mouse state, just to program a simple interactive style button, which is how we used to do it before Flash had its button object, where you could just say, hey, it's a button object, and just stick your stuff in and call it done. So for doing non-Flash development, it's actually a really good practice to force yourself to learn how to make those calls. But I'm not going to force you to do that. You can just use a button object and enjoy the fact that Flash can do that as part of this. So now I have a button. The button tells my movie to play. Then when I hit play, then it starts going through the other frames, where then through code I'm telling sound to play. What you find is the more you start adding in things with code, the less appears in your timeline. So that, looking at that platform game that I just showed earlier, we can see its timeline's entirely empty. It has artwork in the library, and the movie references one external code file or class, a document class that has the information that makes everything come to life. So as projects progress, what we find is we start spending less and less time putting everything on the timeline and start positioning things when we need them through the magic of code.